How you doing, good people? This is the 8-Bit Animal. Okay, so today I've decided to touch on a trilogy of games. All three were developed by a well-known Japanese game developer and publisher. All three are arcade ports, and all three have one dubious thing in common. For their attempts at being arcade accurate, for whatever reason, unlike Capcom or Konami, they didn't try to modify things to make these games feel viable for the home market, and as such, they all, for whatever reason, didn't prove to be as solid as their arcade counterparts. The first game is the NES port of the 1986 arcade classic Ikari Warriors. Now, this first game in the trilogy, it came out around the time, a little bit after Capcom released Commando, and a lot of publishers were pumping out clones of Commando, stuff that that they could use to milk money from that market share. Well, SNK did something to make their game stand out, i.e., they gave their game a unique control feature, a rotary joystick. Now, the Ikari Warriors series, throughout the series, actually featured that rotary joystick, as did many other SNK arcade titles. But Ikari Warriors was the first, and it controlled beautifully. The arcade version did. Well, when this game started popping up on different home consoles, some console versions were better than others. Um, like, say for instance, the Commodore 64 version was a fairly good port, as was the NES port. It was pretty faithful to the spirit of the arcade title. They retained the two-player gameplay. It featured a lot of different little tricks and cheats for infinite lives and invincibility, stuff like that. The only problem was that those cheats could prove to be game-breaking, i.e., they would freeze the game. Ikari Warriors wasn't a terribly difficult game, and it's not now, actually. If anything, the only issue that I can find with the game is that it's slow and it's clunky. Unlike the home port of Commando, which Capcom put out. Now, in an effort to build on the success of the first Ikari Warriors title, a few years later, SNK put out Ikari Warriors 2 Victory Road. It was just titled Victory Road in the arcades, but when they brought it home, they tied it to the Ikari Warriors series, and as such, it's in this it's in this video. Now, Ikari Warriors 2, it introduced this really weird alien invasion storyline, and the gameplay in the home port was choppy. It wasn't a very good game. It also featured some of the muddiest sounding speech samples I've ever heard in an NES title, which is bad considering that Kung Fu was an NES launch title, had sound samples in it, and they actually sound pretty good. Um, for whatever reason, though, people bought Ikari Warriors 2, and I guess SNK figured it was popular. So, a few years later, after that game came out, they put out Ikari Warriors 3 The Rescue, or Ikari 3 The Rescue. Now, this game added some hand-to-hand combat elements to the series, The arcade version played using the rotary joystick. This was one of the last titles that SNK used the rotary joysticks in, and it was actually one of the last non-Neo Geo titles that SNK released, because about a year or two later they started integrating the Neo Geo hardware into everything. So that was one of the major things about Ikari 3. This one had kind of, I guess you could say, a damsel in distress storyline where you're trying to rescue the president's daughter, and so you infiltrate this enemy base and you're fighting your way through to the girl that's been kidnapped, and you have to get her out of this enemy encampment. Um, there are instances where you come across guns. They are, smattered about the game, but for the most part, you use hand-to-hand combat, and it kind of works. It's kind of weird the way it feels, because it still uses that overhead perspective. But Ikari Warriors 3 wasn't a bad game. Nowhere near as bad as the second game, but it still felt like it lacked a little bit when you compared it to other games in that genre. As far as picking up copies of these games, I lucked out and got all three at one time. But if you're looking for games in the series, Ikari 3 is pretty. It's, I guess you could say, it's fairly rare. It's not like looking for a copy of Panic Restaurant or anything like that. But it's hard. It's not the easiest game to come by, and resellers will try to tax you majorly. The first game, not really expensive, not really uncommon. You should be able to find a copy cheap. The second game, honestly, unless you're just a completionist and want all three of them, or you come across the second game mixed in a lot with the first and third games, then pick it up. Other than that, I wouldn't pick up the second game. But this has been the 8-Bit Animal, and I will catch you beautiful people tomorrow.